Whether there was truth to Igave's discovery or not, Nevene doesn't know. He walks into the field, near submerged now under the vile spore mist. Even then sunlight piercing through it seems infected and unclean, muddied by the time it reaches the white crowns. He can hardly stand to look at the flowers, and only finds the strength to walk forward because he's carrying the foundations for the tower he will build. If there are flourishing crowns around him, he can't see them, because he cannot stand to look at the spotted petals and stems. His fever subsides, and he picks up the pace. By twilight, the tower stands proud in the middle of the field, cobbled from many ready components adjusted to work together and fulfill their purpose. Nevene climbs up on it and rests on the top, holding on to the console which will turn it on once he inserts the key. From here, he sees the entire field suffocating. By morning, it should all end. He turns the key, and a whir resonates through the valley. First streaks of blighted spore mist get sucked into the machine and disappear. A gust of cleansed air is pushed on the other side. Nevene stays up there for a while, observing the fruits of his labor, the slow motion of the contaminated air. When the sun goes down and he can barely see the spores anymore, he climbs back down and picks up the monitor adjusted to the planet's endemic toxin. He kneels down and brings it to the level where all the readings must be taken. It looks fine. He means to leave, but worry makes him hesitate. He sits down and gives it time to deliver bad news. To wake up in a world where he caused the colony to perish is still a nightmare somehow. The gentle tapping of stems makes the hours fly by as Nevene falls into a meditative state. The monitor remains calm. A victory, it would seem. And it feels like it this time. The morning doesn't change the toxin readings. The flowers are still filtering the air. But the spore clouds are thinned, once more showing just over several separate clusters. Igave joined Nevene in his vigil, her face blank, revealing no thought or emotion that might be going through her mind. "You feel better," she states. It is true, the fever had returned, but it was lighter and he managed to sleep. Maybe it worked. "It worked," he responds. A week passes, and there isn't a trace of spores in the air. If you wait patiently and observe, sometimes you may catch a thin string leave one of the flower crowns and skim towards the tower ruling over the field. In a month, you won't catch even that. The spores are gone. Nevene stands in front of the mirror and unbuttons his shirt, slowly revealing his skin. It's spotless. The webbings of his fingers still bear the marks of blight, but even those grow smaller with each day. Only the damage to his vision appears permanent. The colors didn't return, keeping the word saturated and bland. Still, it's stable. The shakiness is gone, the shapes are sharp, the image unmoving. He's glad, or at least he assumes he is. The feeling isn't there, the physical reaction that made him smile. But it's irrelevant. Everything worked out. And he learned how to ask himself questions. He'd been doing it more lately. Giving answers still doesn't come easy, though. But one does come. He asks, "Do I want to live here?" It's a question he'd asked himself many a time before. And the answer was always clear and never final, because the question kept coming back and back and back again until finally he finds a way to say no. He packs what little he brought to the surface and returns underground to the temporary. away from the ghostly figures of other colonists in the world he failed to love. This is home. And though he can't find the feeling that used to say home, he knows this is where he ought to be regardless. He walks towards his old home, clutching the key and a box of his belongings. The empty hallways are quiet, aside of the rare sounds caused by the entropy making the abandoned complex fall apart, one cable at a time. Those hanging cables, old batteries, shoddy houses haphazardly nailed together, they are temporary's own hourglass, counting down the time before something breaks and the toxic air leaks into the forgotten, unmaintained hallways. On the way, Nevenes steps too close to a wall and one of the nails tears through his shoulder. He hisses and grabs the wound. It's not deep. He takes out the tissue from his pocket, which he presses against it. "Welcome home," he mutters. On the opposite side to his house lay a tiny storage unit where they used to shove all the unnecessary things they didn't want incinerated just yet. If he's back here, he might as well see if something else doesn't want to return as well. Inside, he finds a solitary white flower, living its best life. The small lamp lighting the unit is actually a sun lamp keeping the plant alive. Nevena kneels down and touches the papery petals, the stem. The hard, sand-like soil the flowers grow best in, similar to the one lining the entire valley, is still moist thanks to the small pump Viveka attached to the pot. Nevena picks up the planter. The flower looks pristine, as they all used to before the spores appeared. Innocent, this one, not a spore around it, not a speck of blight. Perhaps he could use it for research, find out what exactly those spores are. His sleeve becomes wet. He feels it on his forearm. He sets the pot aside and raises his arm to the light. The wound was small, but the blood is draining out of it so fast his makeshift bandage is already soaked. It's not normal blood, either. It's the dark, thick substance of the color Nevena wouldn't mistake for anything else. He grabs a random sheet of metal lying about and cuts his hand. The wound opens, and the liquid, more reminiscent of coagulating blood than a fresh one, begins to seep out. From the edges of the cut, the spots of skin begin to take on a darker color, the discoloration spreading quickly as if it was nothing but paper dipped in dye. Nevena runs. He runs out of the temporary and forces his way through the pool of Eka, his blood sliding through the gel down to the ground. He reaches the surface and for a second means to run towards the field, but then takes a turn and sprints straight to Agave. The fever is returning, the shivers are back, his insides are burning up again. The second she sees him, fear paints on her face. They don't need words. They hurry towards the field. It looks clean. There isn't a single spore in the air. There is no trace of blight on the flower stems. Their crowns are smaller now, closed since they don't need to fight the mist anymore, but they remain spotless. Everything seems good. The air is stale, Agave says. Do you feel it? She takes out the measuring tool and crouches down. What's the read? Nevena rushes her. It's normal. They're still filtering the toxins. But the air feels stale. It has for a while, but I thought I was imagining things. Nevena steps forward. The tourniquet he tied around his arm is pulsating in the rhythm of his heartbeat. The soil seems softer than usual. He goes a step further, and it gets softer yet, like mud. Agave follows him in the distance as he's walking towards the center of the field, with each step his feet sinking easier into the ground underneath them. The flowers seem fine, but it's not fine. Agave crouches down and picks up a handful of soil. As she brings it up to the light, a dark red hue is striking in contrast to the desaturated world. Nevena says, I found the first flower today, back in the temporary. It grows in the planter of soil from the town square. I remember my mother said the ground in the valley had one bizarre compound in it that wasn't present in other samples, but the flowers didn't react to it. Agave, could she have been wrong? Do you know anything about the soil composition here? She stops to follow him, halts, still far away, lowers her hand and drops the dirt she's holding. What if it didn't affect the flowers on a smaller scale? Nevene asks. What if it caused the blight, the spores when there was more of it? Agave doesn't speak. She stands where she stopped like a statue, not making a single move. Nevene drops to his knees and touches a flower stem. His hand is shaking. This is a graveyard, Nevene. Agave's voice is carried by the valley's acoustics, as her own voice is nearly a whisper. This is where we buried the 11 we killed. Nevene stands up and looks at her. What? The 11 messengers that you believe we sent to the homeland. They lie here, in the valley, under the field, she says. The dome. The dome did not malfunction on its own, and it was not a miracle. The warehouse area was ready to sustain all of us and allow us to live down there. It's clear it's not easy for her to speak. The 11 were furious. Our mission was burdened by unnecessary people. They arranged the malfunction of the dome and meant for the scientists and their families to take shelter underground, while the oblivious people from the lottery remain on the surface and succumb to the poison. Agave says. Those you know as the leaders today are the 4 that stopped them. Konto, Seika, Omaes, and I. We turned their plan against them and evacuated everyone, but the 11 of them then damaged the dome as they instructed us to. They died. Here, in the valley, where we then buried their desiccated corpses. Amongst them were the only engineers that knew exactly how to fix the dome, and that cost 3 more volunteer lives. 4, if you count your mother. It saved dozens. After that event, we erased the lottery from our history, and we erased the word from our vocabulary, because that division between our people could not be allowed to exist. Not because it was uncomfortable, Nevene, but because it was killing us. And Viveka did not know. No one knew. No one knows. Nevene takes a snail to the stem of one of the flowers and cuts it open. From within spurts out the dark red fluid. He cuts it all the way down, kneeling in the softened soil. He grabs the cleaved stem and pulls the flower out. A cloud of spores puffs from its roots. They permeate the soil. They spread unnoticed. Hidden, erased, safe from the crowns that could once fight them. There is no such thing as nature's revenge, Nevene whispers to himself. She is an indifferent mother. She cares for her words as much as she does for the meteors that eradicate them. She loves both the starving lion and the gazelle in agony torn apart by the hungry fangs. She created life, but also the death that ends it. She doesn't hate humans any more than she hates a star collapsing on itself. They are all a part of her. It's the lion who torments the gazelle on a selfish quest to sustain himself. It is he who shreds the throat of another of his kind to rule over the herd. Nature doesn't mind. There is no wind now, but the other stems begin to move, tapping Nevene front and back. Blood-like taste fills his mouth, and a stream of substance begins to drip out of the corner of his mouth. He wipes it off and stands up. A thorn sprouting from the stem behind him tears open his shirt. The closed flowers begin to open and release not streams of spores but liquid blood that splatters over the pristine petals. Agave bolts towards Nevene, but he screams, "No, run away!" The stems twist and sprout up, long jagged thorns bursting out of them, cutting them open, releasing the red. They grab onto Nevene's arms and legs, and there's almost care in the way they do it. Not a single one damages his skin. They wrap around, circling his limbs, climbing up around his chest, his neck, his head. His feet leave the ground, and his blood leaves his body. It rains down on the field, and a rogue breeze catches it and carries it over the field. The drops break into a red mist and fall onto the silent flowers. "Wake up," they seem to say. The crowns open, reddened, bloodied, and they rise. Far below, a solitary tower is strangled and crushed, and for a moment, before everything fades away, Nevene feels again. What? Well, that's irrelevant.